My mom blocked my class trip so I'd finally have some self-control, telling me softly, "You'll undo months of hard work." When I asked her why she hated me so much, she laughed light and airy and said, "I'm helping you be less pathetic." I didn't say a word. That was 8 years ago. This morning, she tried to write a note for help but couldn't hold the pen. My mother only wanted to starve one of her children, me, not my perfect sister with her size 0 homecoming dress, not my baby brother who lived on chicken nuggets and chocolate milk, just me, the middle child who took up too much space. When I was 8, she slapped my hand away when I tried to reach for seconds. Luckily, my dad stopped it straight away. He'd spent years in foster homes where kids didn't get more than 1 meal a day. He wanted to break the cycle, but instead of stopping, my mom got crafty. My dad's 16-hour shifts meant daytime meals were her territory. They started small. She served my siblings pancakes while I got a teaspoon of rice. "It's healthier for you," she said, watching me drool over their plates. They'd get after-school snacks. I'd get lectures about listening to my body's real needs. The manipulation was the worst part. If I ever asked for more food, tears, full-blown sobbing about how she was trying to help me, how ungrateful I was. The guilt worked. I learned to stop asking. By 7th grade, I was chewing ice cubes between classes to keep my stomach from growling. The school counselor noticed I kept falling asleep and suggested I might be depressed. I knew better than to tell her I was surviving on 600 calories a day, and I never told my dad directly, but I gave sign. "Is it normal to feel dizzy when you stand up?" I asked him once over dinner. My mom's laugh was light and airy, like an empty stomach growling. You know how dramatic teenage girls can be. I was the same at her age, always complaining, always negative. My dad ruffled my hair, distracted. He believed every word. Why wouldn't he? She kept our pantry stocked, our fridge full, playing the concerned mother when he was home. The universe threw me exactly one lifeline. Our neighbor, Mrs. Garcia. Twice a week, she'd watch me after school while mom ran errands. This woman took one look at me, inhaling the crackers she offered, and knew. Without a word, she started making extra portions of whatever her family was having. Spring rolls, fried rice, actual food with actual calories. Mom would collect me, all grateful smiles. But the moment Mrs. Garcia's door closed, eating like that is why some people never amount to anything. She'd stand there and make me watch while she scraped perfectly good food into the bin. This is why they'll never have our kind of discipline. The irony burned worse than the hunger. Everything changed when I turned 15. My history class was going to Washington, D.C. for 5 days. All meals included hotel breakfast buffets, unlimited snacks. I'd been saving babysitting money for months. The day before, I reminded my mom what time we should be at the airport. Her smile was razor thin. "Sweetie, I don't think you should go," she said softly. "You're finally making some progress. It's just a few days. You'll undo months of hard work," she interrupted. "Maybe when you have more self-control." That night, lying in bed with my stomach cramping from hunger, I tasted something new in my mouth. It was clarity. She'd been feeding on my hunger for 7 years. Time to learn if she had the stomach for her own medicine. From there, I became a different person. Started waking up at 5 a.m. to study, channeling every hunger pang into pure focus. Straight A's junior year, 4th senior year. Teachers call it a remarkable transformation. Really, I just learned that revenge required patience. As soon as I got into college, I chose to become a nutritionist who would later specialize in elder care. Mom thought I was being health conscious. Really, I was becoming an expert in elder housing. And the day after I graduated, my mom became my first client because that's when she got into a car accident. The security cameras just so happened to be blacked out, so they never called perpetrator. What a shame. Luckily, she survived with a few minor bruises and a hip placement. Surgery went fine, but she needed placement for rehab. Luckily for her, she had a daughter who knew the system inside and out, and who would believe that her nutritionist daughter is starving her. I found the perfect facility, Sunset Manor Rehabilitation Center. Small, understaffed, and desperate for qualified family involvement. The intake coordinator practically begged me to stay involved with mom's care plan. The first week, I kept things subtle, modified her meal plan to support healing, with portion sizes that would make a toddler cry. When mom complained to the nurses about feeling hungry, I expressed concern about post-surgical delirium. The staff nodded sympathetically and made notes in her chart about confusion. By week 2, mom started catching on. She grabbed my wrist during one of my visits, her fingers surprisingly strong, despite the weight loss. Her eyes searched mine with a desperation I recognized from my own childhood mirror. I gently removed her hand and adjusted her blanket. The nurse watching from the doorway smiled at my attentiveness. I'd cultivated relationships with every staff member, bringing them coffee and remembering their kids' names. They trusted me completely. Mom tried everything. She hoarded crackers from other residents, but I mentioned her concerning food-seeking behaviors to the head nurse. They started monitoring her more closely. She attempted to order a delivery, but I'd already spoken with the front desk about her impulsive spending due to medication side effects. The beauty of my plan lay in its medical legitimacy. Every restriction had a reasonable explanation. Low sodium for her blood pressure, reduced portions for optimal healing, limited snacks to prevent medication interactions. I had studies and articles to back up every decision. 3 weeks in, mom's cheekbones emerged like sharp accusations. She'd lost 15 pounds. The staff praised her progress. I brought sugar-free jello as a treat and watched her eat it with shaking hands. During family visits, I played the devoted daughter perfectly. Dad came twice a week after work, exhausted and trusting. I'd update him on her excellent care while mom sat silent, knowing any complaint would sound like the ramblings of a difficult patient. My siblings barely visited. My sister was busy with her new job, my brother with college. When they did come, I made sure mom had just eaten her carefully measured meal. They saw a recovering woman getting excellent care from her knowledgeable daughter. The night sweats started in week 4. Mom would wake up drenched, her body eating itself in desperation. The nurses changed her sheets and noted possible medication side effects. I suggested checking her thyroid levels, buying another week of delays. She tried writing notes to slip to visitors, but her handwriting had become shaky from weakness. The few she managed looked like the scrawlings of a confused elderly woman. I made sure to express my concern about her mental state to anyone who would listen. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd once convinced everyone I was just being dramatic about feeling faint. Now I convinced them she was being dramatic about feeling hungry. The same words, reversed roles, perfect symmetry. One afternoon I caught her trying to eat flowers from a visitor's bouquet. The nurse who found her called me immediately, deeply concerned. I rushed over, the picture of a worried daughter, and held mom's hand while discussing potential psychiatric evaluation. Mom's eyes met mine over the nurse's shoulder. In them, I saw recognition, not just of what I was doing, but why. The understanding that this was exactly what she'd done to me, reflected back with professional precision. I squeezed her hand gently, the same way she used to squeeze mine when forcing me to skip meals in public. The nurse praised my compassion. Mom's fingers trembled in my grip. By week 5, she stopped fighting. The staff noted her improved compliance. I gradually increased her portions by microscopic amounts, just enough to keep her stable, but never satisfied. She existed in that familiar space between empty and almost enough. During one visit, she whispered something about Mrs. Garcia. I leaned in close, ostensibly to hear better, and reminded her that Mrs. Garcia had moved away years ago. No one to verify her stories about after-school meals, no one to contradict my version of our past. The rehabilitation center's nutritionists complimented my detailed meal plans, I'd become their unofficial consultant, helping with other patients while maintaining Mom's special dietary need. They offered me a part-time position. I declined graciously, citing my need to focus on my mother's recovery. 6 weeks in, Mom had lost 25 pounds. Physical therapists expressed concern, but I produced research about optimal body weight for joint recovery. My credentials carried weight. My mother's words carried none. She started refusing to see me, but I explained to the staff about our complicated relationship, how her guilt over past parenting mistakes manifested as rejection. They encouraged her to accept my visits for her own healing. She had no choice but to watch me control every bite she took. The hardest part was hiding my own conflict. Watching her shrink reminded me of my teenage years, but satisfaction ward was something uncomfortable in my chest. I pushed it down like she'd taught me to push down hunger. One evening, Dad mentioned Mom seemed different. I agreed, suggesting the trauma from her accident had affected her more than we'd realized. He trusted my professional opinion. Why wouldn't he? I spent years becoming exactly the expert he'd listened to. As week 7 ended, I stood in her doorway watching her sleep. Her face had taken on that hollow look I knew so well. Tomorrow, I'd implement phase 2 of her recovery plan. She learned what it felt like when hunger became your only reliable companion. The nurse at the station smiled and waved. I waved back, the perfect picture of a devoted daughter. Mom's breathing was shallow but steady. She'd survive this, just like I had, but she'd never forget the taste of her own medicine. I had 3 more weeks before insurance would push for discharge. 3 weeks to make sure she understood completely. The anticipation sat in my stomach like a meal I'd never gotten to finish. The morning of week 8 brought an unexpected complication. Mom had developed a urinary tract infection, common in elderly patients but concerning given her weakened state. The doctor prescribed antibiotics that required food intake to prevent stomach upset. I watched the physician write the order, my mind racing through contingencies. I adjusted her meal plan accordingly, adding just enough bland crackers to cushion the medication. The staff appreciated my quick response and medical knowledge. Mom's eyes tracked my every movement as I calculated the minimum calories needed for medication compliance. Her roommate, a chatty woman recovering from knee surgery, started noticing Mom's eating pattern. During my next visit, the roommate mentioned how little Mom ate compared to other patients. I expressed gratitude for her concern and explained Mom's sensitive digestive system post-surgery. The roommate nodded knowingly and changed the subject. Mom began timing her bathroom trips to coincide with meal deliveries, hoping to sneak extra portions from the cart. The staff caught her once finding dinner rolls hidden in her bathrobe pockets. I discussed this concerning behavior with the head nurse, suggesting we monitor for signs of hoarding disorder. They agreed to keep closer eye on her. The physical therapist pulled me aside during week 9. Mom's muscle weakness was impeding her recovery progress. I produced articles about age-related muscle atrophy and suggested modified exercises. The way she handles the roommate's observation and the physical therapist's worry shows how she's learned to deflect concern just like her mother once did. The infection forcing extra food is interesting too, showing how even medical needs become part of this. The therapist seemed satisfied, though I noticed her watching Mom more carefully during sessions. Mom's next strategy involved befriending other patients during group activities. She'd sit next to different people each day, hoping someone would share their snack. I spoke with the activities coordinator about Mom's boundary issues and need for structured social interactions. They started assigning her specific seats away from patients who brought food. One afternoon, I arrived to find Mom had convinced a visitor to bring her a sandwich from the cafeteria. She was halfway through it when I walked in. I thanked the visitor for their kindness while explaining Mom's strict dietary requirement. After they left, I documented the incident in her chart as evidence of impaired judgment. The facility's social workers scheduled a family meeting to discuss Mom's progress. Dad attended despite his exhaustion, along with my sister who'd taken time off work. I presented Mom's weight loss as positive progress toward optimal healing. My sister mentioned Mom seemed tired, but I attributed it to the normal recovery process. Dad squeezed Mom's hand and told her to follow the doctor's orders. Mom's desperation escalated during week 10. She started saving sugar packets from her coffee, eating them when staff wasn't looking. A nurse found her licking empty yogurt containers from other patients' trays. Each incident added to her file, painting a picture of cognitive decline. I began varying my visit times to catch her off guard. Sometimes I'd arrive during meals, other times just after. She never knew when I'd appear to check her compliance. The unpredictability mirrored my childhood, never knowing when food would be withheld or offered. The facility's doctor ordered blood work to investigate Mom's continued weakness. I volunteered to review the results with him, pointing out levels that were concerning but not quite critical. We agreed to monitor closely while maintaining her current care plan. Mom watched our discussion from her bed, her protest dismissed as anxiety. Her weight had dropped to levels that made her hip bones visible through her hospital gown. The nursing staff expressed concern, but I reminded them of her pre-accident weight and the importance of not overfeeding during recovery. They deferred to my expertise, though I caught worried glances between them. Mom attempted to call my father from the facility phone, but I'd already explained to him about her confusion and tendency to exaggerate. When he mentioned her call, I suggested limiting phone access to reduce her anxiety. He agreed it was probably best. During week 11, Mom's hair began thinning noticeably. The nurses documented it as a possible reaction to medications or stress. I brought her a soft hat, expressing concern about her comfort. She threw it at the wall after I left, according to the aide who cleaned her room. The occupational therapist noticed Mom's hands shaking during fine motor exercises. I explained that our family had a history of essential tremor, nothing concerning. The therapist made notes but continued working with Mom on her exercises, though progress remained minimal. Mom's last desperate attempt involved writing a letter to her doctor. Her handwriting was barely legible, the words rambling about being starved by her daughter. The nurse who found it showed it to me with concern about Mom's mental state. I read it carefully, my expression troubled, and suggested we might need to consider a psychiatric consultation. The psychiatrist visited the following day. Mom tried to explain her situation, but her physical weakness made her emotional and confused. The doctor noted signs of depression and possible paranoia. I sat quietly during the evaluation, occasionally providing helpful context about our family dynamic. They started Mom on a mild antidepressant, which required more careful meal timing. I adjusted her plan accordingly, maintaining the same caloric restrictions while accommodating the new medication schedule. The staff praised my diligence in managing such complex care requirements. By the end of week 11, Mom had stopped making eye contact with anyone. She lay in bed most of the day, conserving energy. The staff attributed her lethargy to depression, encouraging her to participate in activities. She complied minimally, moving through emotions like a ghost. I brought photo albums during one visit, hoping to stimulate positive memories. Each picture showed family gatherings centered around food, Thanksgiving dinners, birthday cakes, summer barbecues. Mom turned her face to the wall, but not before I saw the recognition in her eyes. She understood the cruelty of the gesture. The insurance company began pushing for discharge planning. Mom wasn't progressing as expected, but she no longer met criteria for skilled nursing care. I researched home health agencies looking for ones with minimal oversight and overworked staff. The social worker appreciated my proactive approach. During a care plan meeting, I proposed transitioning Mom home with my supervision. The team expressed concern about her weakness and my ability to manage her care alone. I presented a detailed plan involving meal delivery services, visiting nurses, and my daily oversight. My professional credentials and evident devotion convinced them. Mom's panic was palpable when she learned about the discharge plan. She grabbed at the social worker's sleeve, trying to communicate her fear. I gently intervened, explaining that Mom had always been anxious about change. The social worker patted Mom's hand sympathetically and assured her she'd be in good hands. I spent the next week preparing her house, removing anything she could eat without my knowledge. I installed locks on the pantry and refrigerator, explaining to Dad that it would help monitor her intake for medical reasons. He was too tired from work to question it. The meal delivery service I selected specialized in portion-controlled, medically tailored meals. I worked directly with their nutritionist to design Mom's menu. Each meal was precisely calculated, leaving no room for deviation. The delivery driver would only release food to me, ensuring complete control. Mom's final days at the facility were spent in silent observation. She watched me interact with staff, maintaining my facade of concerned daughter. Her eyes held a mixture of fear and something else, perhaps respect for how thoroughly I'd orchestrated her situation. The night before discharge, I sat beside her bed reviewing the home care instructions. Mom's breathing was shallow but steady. Her body adapted to chronic hunger just as mine once had. I explained how her new routine would work, my voice gentle and caring for any staff within earshot. Her fingers clutched the bedsheet as I described the meal schedule, the locked cabinets, the monitored eating times, everything she'd subjected me to, refined and perfected through professional knowledge. The symmetry was almost poetic. The discharge coordinator stopped by to ensure everything was ready. She commended me for my dedication, noting how few family members showed such involvement. I thanked her, expressing how much I'd learned from their excellent care. Mom remained silent, knowing any protest would seem like the complaints of a difficult patient. On discharge day, I arrived early to help Mom dress. Her clothes hung loose on her diminished frame, requiring safety pins to keep them in place. The staff gathered to say goodbye, wishing her well in her continued recovery. She nodded weakly, beyond fighting. The wheelchair ride to the car was slow, Mom's weakness requiring frequent stops. Staff members held doors and offered encouragement. I pushed the wheelchair carefully, the devoted daughter taking her mother home. Mom's hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white with tension. Loading her into the car required help from an aide. Mom had lost so much muscle mass that simple movements exhausted her. I thanked the aide profusely, adjusting Mom's seatbelt with practiced care. The aide waved goodbye, unaware of what awaited Mom at home. The drive home was silent except for my occasional comments about the scenery. Mom stared out the window, perhaps remembering all the car rides where she'd lectured me about food. Now she sat powerless, dependent on the daughter she'd once controlled through hunger. Pulling into the driveway, I saw Dad's car was gone. He'd taken an extra shift, perfect timing. I helped Mom inside, settling her into the recliner she'd once occupied while watching me clear my barely touched plate. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I showed her the new kitchen setup, the locked cabinets, and empty refrigerator. Her meal would arrive soon, I explained, precisely portioned for her needs. She nodded, understanding that the next phase of her education had begun. The student had become the master, and the lessons would continue. The first meal delivery at home arrived precisely at noon. I signed for it while Mom watched from her chair, her fingers gripping the armrests. The driver handed over the insulated container without question, having been instructed to release meals only to me. I carried it to the kitchen, making a show of checking the contents against her dietary requirements. Mom's portion was smaller than what prisoners receive. I heated it carefully, arranging the meager serving on her favorite plate to make it look even more inadequate. She ate in mechanical bites, her body trained by weeks of deprivation to savor every morsel. That evening, Dad came home to find Mom already in bed. I explained she'd had a tiring first day home, adjusting to the new routine. He kissed her forehead and headed to the kitchen, where I prepared his favorite pot roast. The smell must have drifted upstairs to Mom's room, another form of torture I hadn't planned, but didn't prevent. The visiting nurse arrived the next morning for Mom's assessment. I hovered nearby, providing helpful context about her recovery needs. The nurse checked Mom's vitals, noting her low blood pressure and rapid heart rate. I mentioned these were consistent with her facility readings, producing the discharge paperwork as evidence. Mom tried to catch the nurse's attention, gesturing weakly toward the kitchen. I quickly explained her fixation on food since the accident, how it had become an unhealthy obsession. The nurse made sympathetic noises while documenting Mom's food-seeking behaviors in her notes. Over the following days, I established a rigid routine. Breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 5. Each meal precisely measured, each calorie accounted for. Mom learned to stop asking for more, just as I had learned decades ago. The parallel wasn't lost on either of us. My sister visited on the weekend, bringing her new boyfriend. I prepared a spread of appetizers, making sure Mom had already eaten her allocated portion. She sat quietly while we chatted about my sister's promotion, occasionally glancing at the untouched cheese and crackers just out of reach. The boyfriend complimented Mom on raising such successful daughters. Mom's laugh was hollow, her eyes finding mine across the room. I smiled warmly, playing the devoted caregiver, while my sister remained oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. That night, I heard Mom trying to open the pantry lock. The scratching sounds echoed through the quiet house, desperate and futile. I lay in my childhood bed, remembering similar nights when I'd snuck downstairs only to find empty shelves, Mom having hidden anything edible. The next morning, I found scratches around the lock mechanism. I examined them with concern, mentioning to Dad that Mom might need her medication adjusted. He agreed to call her doctor, trusting my assessment of her declining mental state. Mom's next strategy involved the neighbors. Honestly, I find it interesting that she uses the same kitchen where she once went hungry. Also, the small touches, like using Mom's favorite plate to make the tiny portions look even smaller, reveal how much thought went into each step. She began sitting by the window whenever they gardened, hoping to catch their attention. I noticed and rearranged the furniture, explaining that direct sunlight wasn't good for her recovery. The new arrangement blocked her view of the street. During her physical therapy appointment, Mom collapsed. The therapist called me immediately, voice tight with worry. I rushed over, finding Mom on the exercise mat, her body trembling from exertion and malnutrition. The therapist suggested increasing her caloric intake, but I produced research about refeeding syndrome, emphasizing the dangers of too rapid weight gain. Back home, I prepared her lunch with extra care, adding 3 additional crackers to show my concern. Mom ate them slowly, her body desperate for every calorie. I watched from the doorway, remembering how she used to watch me eat my meager portions with the same detached interest. The home health aide arrived from Mom's bath, commenting on her prominent ribs. I expressed similar concern, explaining how the accident had affected her appetite. The aide helped Mom into the tub while I prepared fresh clothes, choosing items that would hide her skeletal frame from casual observers. Mom's attempts to communicate grew more desperate. She began leaving notes in places she thought I wouldn't check, tucked behind picture frames or inside book covers. I found them all, of course. Her handwriting had deteriorated further, the messages barely legible pleas for help. I collected each note carefully, filing them with her medical paperwork. If anyone ever questioned my care, these rambling, paranoid messages would only support my narrative of her declining mental health. Mom watched me organize papers, understanding dawning in her sunken eyes. The irony of our reversal struck me during one particularly quiet afternoon. Mom dozed in her chair while I prepared her dinner, the same chair where she'd sat years ago watching me struggle with hunger. Now she occupied that space, diminished and dependent, while I controlled every aspect of her sustenance. Her dinner that night was vegetable broth with a small portion of rice. I'd calculated the exact minimum needed to keep her functional, but never satisfied. She ate without complaint, having learned that resistance only led to further restrictions. The lesson had taken her months to learn. It had taken me years. Dad noticed Mom's continued weight loss during Sunday dinner. I served the family pot roast while Mom received her special meal, explaining her dietary restrictions with practiced ease. My brother, home from college, mentioned Mom looked tired. I agreed, suggesting the recovery process was harder than we'd anticipated. After dinner, I found Mom trying to eat crumbs from the tablecloth. The sight triggered a memory of myself doing the same at 12, desperate for any calories I could find. I cleaned the table thoroughly, removing any temptation, just as she had done to me. The next week brought a close call. Mom managed to order food delivery using an old credit card I'd missed. The driver arrived just as I returned from grocery shopping. I intercepted him at the door, explaining Mom's condition and tendency toward impulsive purchases. He left with the food and a generous tip for his trouble. Inside, Mom sat defeated in her chair. I canceled the credit card immediately, explaining to Dad that we needed to monitor her spending due to her mental state. He agreed without question, adding it to the growing list of concerning behaviors I'd carefully documented. Her desperation peaked when she attempted to eat houseplants. I found her gnawing on a jade plant leaf, green juice staining her chin. The sight was pathetic and familiar. I'd once tried eating grass from our backyard, driven by the same hollow desperation that now consumed her. I removed all plants from her reach, explaining to Dad that some were toxic and Mom's judgment couldn't be trusted. He helped me move them to the garage, shaking his head at how much his wife had changed since the accident. If only he knew the accident was just the beginning. The visiting nurse returned for a follow-up assessment. Mom's weight had dropped another 8 pounds. The nurse expressed serious concern, suggesting we might need to consider tube feeding. I appeared thoughtful, mentioning my reluctance to take such drastic measures, but agreeing to discuss it with her doctor. That afternoon, I increased Mom's portion slightly, just enough to avoid medical intervention. She ate gratefully, her body responding to even minor increases with pathetic eagerness. I watched her eat, remembering my own gratitude for similar crumbs of mercy. Mom's final attempt at resistance came through my brother. During his next visit, she managed to pull him aside while I was in the bathroom. I returned to find her gripping his hands, tears streaming down her face. He looked uncomfortable and confused, glancing at me for explanation. I gently separated them, explaining that Mom had been having episodes of confusion and paranoia. My brother nodded, remembering the documentation I'd shared about her mental decline. He hugged her goodbye, promising to visit again soon, unaware of her desperate attempt to communicate. That night, Mom stopped crying. She sat in her chair, staring at nothing, finally understanding what I'd known since childhood. When the person controlling your food is also seen as your caregiver, no one questions the hunger, no one investigates the weight loss, no one believes the victim. I prepared her evening meal with the same precision I'd applied for months. 3 ounces of protein, a quarter cup of vegetables, 1 small roll. She ate mechanically, her spirit as depleted as her body. The student had graduated, the lesson complete. The next morning, I found her attempting to write one final note. Her hands shook too badly to form letters. The pen falling from her weakened grip, I picked it up, placing it back in the drawer, out of reach. She watched me with eyes that held complete understanding. I sat beside her, neither of us speaking. The silence stretched between us, heavy with shared history. She knew why I'd done this, just as I knew why she'd done it to me. The cycle of hunger, control, and helplessness had come full circle. That evening, Dad mentioned Mom seemed more settled. I agreed, noting that she'd finally accepted her new routine. He squeezed my shoulder, grateful for my dedication to her care. Behind us, Mom sat motionless, the fight completely drained from her starved frame. The rehabilitation center called follow-up on Mom's progress. I provided a glowing report of her adaptation to home care, thanking them for their excellent preparation. They expressed satisfaction that their treatment plan had been so successful, unaware of how I'd modified it to serve my own ends. As weeks turned to months, Mom's existence narrowed to the boundaries I created. Mealtimes became her only markers of passing time, just as they'd once been mine. She learned to make her portions last, eating with the same desperate slowness I'd perfected as a child. The symmetry was complete. Where she had once wielded hunger as a weapon against me, I now returned it with professional precision. Every calorie calculated, every meal monitored, every protest dismissed as confusion. She existed in the same state of controlled starvation she'd forced upon me, but with one crucial difference. I had escaped. She never would. Mom's acceptance of her situation was absolute. She no longer searched for food or attempted to communicate plight. She simply existed within the narrow parameters I'd established, sustained but never satisfied, alive but never truly living, the perfect mirror of my own stolen childhood. In the end, we both got exactly what we deserved. The story ends with a perfect mirror of the beginning, where the daughter now controls every meal just like her mother did. See you guys in the next one. If you hate or love the new commentary, please comment down below.